Welcome here in Holland, Jeffrey Smith.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm a big fan of you for more than 10 years. And I was thinking about that we can invite you here to Holland about your idea about the non-GMO ideas from you. That really inspires me. But we did a sort of survey here in Holland, and awareness about GMO is not that high yet. But I had a few questions. One was, for example, that we don't care about the food of people in other countries, that we cannot produce enough food.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your opinion about that?
Well, back when Europe was starting to reject GMOs, Monsanto took out a full-page ad in the 90s saying that we need GMOs to feed the world. Mm-hmm. There was a conference going on of developing countries, mostly in Africa, and I think it was all in Africa, and they responded with their own ad saying, don't use us as an excuse for your food. It turns out that I have spoken to the world's experts in how to feed the world. They were convened by the United Nations and the World Bank to do a report. It's called the ISTAD report, and it's basically the future of agriculture and what will work and what will feed the hungry world and eradicate poverty and create sustainability. And they rejected GMOs completely. They said GMOs have nothing to offer. And I spoke to the co-chairman of the report, and I spoke to several of the lead writers who were writing for different continents. Same thing. It's GMOs. One of the co-chairmen wrote that it's like a solution looking for a problem because it doesn't actually solve the problems that we have. GMOs do not increase yield. In fact, in some cases they reduce yield, whereas agroecology, which was recommended by these more than 400 scientists in the UN paper, can double yields in developing countries and provide healthier soil and healthier food, high nutrients. So GMOs don't increase yield, and they also point out that increased yield alone is not necessarily the way to feed the hungry world, because we have more food per person than any time in human history, and close to 1 billion people go to bed every night either hungry or malnourished. So access to the food, distribution, the poverty issue is part of a holistic issue. Now with GMOs, the makers have pretended that GMOs were going to solve the problem, and this actually works against feeding the hungry world because it takes money and attention away from the real solutions. And it's also, if you were to design GMOs to feed the world, you would never design the GMOs that are on the market now. Mm-hmm. Most of the GMOs are designed to be sprayed with herbicide, which kills all of the other plant biodiversity in the field. We call them weeds. In the developing countries, they call them food, and part of their diverse food. So there hasn't been anything that was really designed for developing countries with them in mind, and it certainly is not a technology in its current state that has anything to offer the goals of this ISTAD report to feed the hungry world, eradicate poverty, or create sustainability.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Eh? Mm-hmm. And what about the question is that the changing in DNA that happens also in nature? So what's the difference in your opinion?
Well,
compared with the GMO?
It's interesting that the biotech industry likes to project a myth that GMO is just an extension of natural breeding, and that it's even more precise, and that it's just the same evolution of farming that's been going on for 10,000 years. Well, the Food and Drug Administration of the United States, the leaders asked the scientists in 1990 and 91 and 92 to comment on the risks associated with GMOs and how they compare to non-GMOs and what to do about it. And the Linda Kahl, who was the compliance officer, summarized the findings and said it's the opinion of the technical experts at the agency that the process of genetic engineering is different from natural breeding and leads to different risks. And they pointed out that the process can create allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems, and said we need to do detailed toxicological and other studies to make sure that humans are not at risk. but the person in charge of policy at the FDA was Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president. Monsanto's the big GMO company. And so the FDA policy ignored its own scientists, falsely claimed that the agency wasn't aware of any differences, and said no testing or labeling was necessary. I asked the developer of the first commercialized genetically modified crop in the United States whether GMOs are simply an extension of natural breeding, and she rolled her eyes. We were on stage together and said, no, it's not. Including Nobel Prize winner George Wald said we should not confuse the two. With natural breeding, it's sexual reproduction, and the parents provide DNA from within the same species. There's a certain amount of variation that occurs. With genetic engineering, you may take a gene from a completely different species, make millions of copies, put it into a gun, shoot the gun into a plate of cells, destroying or damaging some of the genes and the DNA, cloning those plants. It can create massive collateral damage with hundreds or thousands of mutations. All of that is unique to the genetic engineering process.
What happens with when you use GMO with the amount of minerals in foods and vegetables? Because you talk about in your films about chelated.
Right.
What does that mean? Well,
let's first talk about the minerals in the fruits and vegetables, and they're going down. I know in the United States, an acquaintance of mine spent months in the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture library, reading the mineral levels from previous years and tracking them and finding that the mineral level was going down. And that has to do with industrial agricultural practices. On top of that, with Roundup herbicide, which is sprayed on most GMOs because GMOs are designed to be sprayed with Roundup ready crops. Roundup chelates minerals, meaning it binds with the minerals, making them unavailable to the crop. That's part of the way that it kills the plant. If you look at a graph about how much of the minerals go into the crop compared to a normal crop, it's a very small amount. When you look at the amount of minerals that move through the crop, it's even smaller. So you end up with minerally depleted food. And then the animals eat the mineral depleted food, and they also eat residues of the Roundup on the Roundup ready crops, which further binds with minerals in their body, making that unusable. And then humans eat the animals and the crops and the Roundup residues, which then also chelates the minerals. And if you look at the various diseases, there's a controversy over which diseases are mineral deficient based. Some doctors would say hundreds and hundreds of diseases are based on mineral deficiency. Others will say less, but everyone agrees that minerals are absolutely essential. If you look at the diagram of certain reactions in the body, you'll find certain minerals, like the keys in the ignition. Without the mineral, nothing happens. Once the mineral is there, the whole metabolic pathway, the whole action within the cells can take place. So if we are depleting minerals, then it can affect fertility, health, vitality, all sorts of things.
What about the World Health Organization? Like compared with our country, Holland, it's completely safe. Because when you look at the website from the health department, GMO is completely safe. And another thing is, when you eat right, you will get enough minerals and vitamins in your food. But the World Health Organization has another opinion. That's what I saw. They said it's probably, let's say, not healthy for you. So what's your idea about that?
Well, it's interesting.
It's a little bit confusing.
And part of that confusion is by design, because a lot of the official organizations around the world, unfortunately, have been infiltrated by the proponents of GMOs, like the European Food Safety Authority, for example. In their genetic engineering committee, they have a lot of people who are also part of an association designed to promote GMOs in the country. And when you look at some of their opinions, they have literally cut and pasted Monsanto's statements as their own. A recent chairman of the Genetic Engineering Committee left EFSA to work with Syngenta as a vice president. And there's been a lot of exposure in the United States recently with the Environmental Protection Agency. There's been a lot of exposure in the United States recently with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, where the documents that were forced out of Monsanto's secret files and made public showed that they had their own people working for Monsanto, on behalf of Monsanto, in the Environmental Protection Agency, and interfering with research and making judgments, etc., that were not based on science. The World Health Organization, there was a former deputy director who said that you can't say that GMOs are safe because not enough research has been done. He made that statement in a conference in Thailand. And other members of the World Health Organization might say something different. And it is confusing because you don't know who to trust. You don't know whether they're the liars, the lied to, the informed, or the uninformed. Dr. David Suzuki, who is a geneticist from Canada who's on television a lot, he said that if any politician or scientist tells you that GMOs are safe, they're either very stupid or intentionally lying because the research has not been done. When I read the reviews, for example, of certain organizations like the National Science, the Science Academy, when I read certain reviews from the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, you could see how they consciously left out certain studies and certain aspects of genetic engineering, didn't use certain citations. And when you look at the compilations done by the industry, they may present all sorts of evidence saying that GMOs are safe. But when a competent scientist looks at it, they say, oh, these are not safety studies. These are studies that are used for commercial purposes, like the size of the breast of the chicken. It has nothing to do with human studies. And when you look at the human studies, nearly every one of them shows problems, and the ones that show a lot of problems weren't included in the compilation. So it's very confusing because the biotech industry has a lot of power, and they have a lot of control. So when I've traveled to 45 countries, I've found that very often they will capture a certain ministry, the Ministry of Agriculture in particular, the Ministry of Science and Technology. But when you talk to certain approval bodies, like I've talked to them in Europe and I've talked to them in Brazil and in India, the majority are often composed of the pro-GMO scientists who vote as a bloc. And one scientist was asked to attend the approval committee process. He's one of the top scientists in India, asked by the Supreme Court. And he said they absolutely do not look at any evidence showing that there's problems. They'll always approve it. They'll always say it's good. And anyone that presents anything that shows that it's not good, they'll simply say, oh, that was discredited. So his report to the Prime Minister and to the Minister of Health was that no GMO in the world has been properly investigated. And of the 25 or 30 areas that need to be looked at, only about 10% have been looked at. And even then, by the companies producing it in superficial ways and can be discounted completely. However, when I talk to scientists who are doing independent research on GMOs, they say it's clear that the evidence shows that we should never have released them, we should not be eating them, and they're not safe.
Okay. But I had also a few questions of people. So where can I find the information that it is not safe? Because how many tests have been done on that it's not safe? So where can we find it? Is that available?
Sure. In 2007, I released a book called Genetic Roulette, The Documented Health Risks of Genetically Engineered Foods. And that was the compilation of everything I could find working with 30 scientists around the world. And that was a pretty substantial argument, but it's gotten a lot more now. Mm-hmm. In the last 11 years, there's more information. There's a book called GMO Myths and Truths, which is available for free online at earthopensource.org. And a colleague of mine, Stephen Drucker, has written a book called Altered Genes, Twisted Truth, which is quite long. Mm-hmm. So if you want to read the shorter version, then the Myths and Truths. But the longer version describes how all of the deceptions have occurred in the 2 decades of promoting GMOs. On our website at responsibletechnology.org, we have plenty of research, and we also publish more and more evidence each month about the dangers. So in my films, Genetic Roulette, and in the film I did with Amy Hart, Secret Ingredients, there's also a lot of research.
Okay.
So most people aren't interested in sitting down to read a whole book, so we say you can watch the movie and then share
Yes.
it with your friends.
Yeah. So there is enough information
Oh, yeah,
people
absolutely.
can find.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for your interview, and I really appreciate that you're here in Holland. And maybe we can do a few interviews also in the United States later on.
Sure.
And I'm very happy that you're here.
And I'm really glad that you're taking to heart all of this information in the product formulations and being a leader in that. It's very exciting to me to see that the work that we've done has influenced your choices and decisions, which will influence the health of so many people.
Yeah, because based on your information, that's what I use for my business.
Beautiful.
So I thank you for that.
You're most welcome.
Okay, thanks.